Let's get to it, man. It's the game that many people were highly anticipating, the game between two of the NFL's best this year, the Chiefs and the Eagles. And it's a game in which I think both teams, for the most, pretty much the most part, lived up to the hype. This was a game that was very competitive, back and forth. Even with the team getting up 10 points at the half, like the Eagles, the Chiefs found their way back into the game by really running that offense efficiently. And then it had this ultimate ending that ultimately kind of felt like a bit of a step down from the quality of play that we had been seeing for around the first 57, 58 minutes or so. So I think it was a good game. Congratulations to the Chiefs. Obviously, your second Super Bowl in three tries here. You guys are building something special there. And the Eagles came that close, Mitch, but unfortunately, it came down to the Zebras, but not in a way that I initially thought it would following the game.
Yeah, it was a great game. Like that's all I had really hoped for, Mitch. When you and I were talking last week about previewing this Super Bowl, we just wanted it to be a very, very good Super Bowl. And it was for the most part. I mean, you talk about swings of events, emotions, teams getting hot, and taking all the momentum. You just hate to see a game end like that. You hate to see it be, I don't want to see the outcome be determined by the officials, but Mitch, there weren't many penalty flags all game. If we're
No.
being honest here, I mean, there was no roughing the passer, to my knowledge. There was no pass interference, to my knowledge. And then for a holding call to be called at that point and stage in the game, it sucks. But at the same time, I, as much as I hated the call, I can't sit here and say it was the wrong call because you even had the Eagles corner come out after the game and said he held him. Um, so anybody that says that wasn't the right call, I mean, the person that committed the penalty even came out and said, I did hold him. You just, the way the game was being played, Mitch, you didn't want to see it. You wanted to see the Eagles get a chance. And yes, they got the ball back with 8 seconds left. So
Yeah.
that doesn't really count. You wanted to see them get it back with maybe a minute 45 to go, maybe one timeout. You wanted to see, Jalen Hurts have a shot because of the way those quarterbacks were playing, especially Mahomes in the second half, but Hurts the entire game. It was awesome. It was electrifying. It's exactly what you wanted to see. And we had the two top teams throughout the entire regular season in the NFL, the number one seed in each conference, going toe to toe with each other. It was a lot of fun, but you just hate to see a game end like that. And let's keep in mind, Mitch, it was called holding. It was a holding penalty called. There's people
Yes.
saying, why'd they call pass interference? That ball wasn't catchable. That's why it was a holding
Right.
call. If it
Right. And
was pass interference, that flag probably gets picked up because that ball did not seem catchable.
right.
At the same time, it didn't seem catchable because he was held. Um, the way I feel about this game, though, is I think, first off, and I meant to send this to you to see if we could pull it up on the screen, but I completely forgot. ESPN put a graphic out of Patrick Mahomes stepping over Jalen Hurts.
Hmm.
I just find that extremely disrespectful. I do. Mahomes played a great game in the second half, really. I mean, Mitch, if you would have said before the Super Bowl, if you would have told me last week, hey, Jalen Hurts is going to throw for 300 plus yards and Mahomes isn't even going to get 200, I would have said you're a liar. I would have said, I don't know what you're on, but I need to know what you're on in case I ever need it. But you're a liar. But sure enough, Jalen Hurts goes 27 to 38, 304 touchdowns, 304 yards, one touchdown. Yes, he had a costly turnover, but he came right back after he fumbled on the scoop and score for the Chiefs, and he led the Eagles down the field. And Mahomes was 21 to 27 with 182 yards and 3 touchdowns. I just did not find the graphic to be fair because I thought Jalen Hurts played a phenomenal game. I also thought Jalen Hurts proved all the doubters wrong that didn't think he could A, be a good quarterback in the NFL, or B, be the franchise quarterback a team needs. And I think, Mitch, after what we saw this season, it's safe to say he is. He was the MVP runner-up in the regular season, obviously, to Patrick Mahomes. That was my biggest gripe, to be honest with you, is I just feel that there's still big outlets, ESPN being one of them, disrespecting the effort Jalen Hurts put out there last night when realistically, this vaunted Eagles defense that we heard all about, they led the league in sacks. Their front four was tremendous. They don't have to rush the passer to get to the quarterback, and they had no sacks last night. I thought Hurts did everything he possibly could.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the better overall quarterback, because if you ask me which quarterback do you want to start a team, I'm still taking Patrick Mahomes.
Sure.
The better overall quarterback willed his team down the field. put them in position to win. And they outscored the Eagles 24-11 in the second half. I mean, that's the story right there. The Eagles had all the momentum going into halftime. Mahomes limping into the locker room. You weren't sure what he was going to do. Now, obviously, he got shot up with something at halftime because he didn't really look like he was limping at all in the second half. But that's what professional football is when you have these top tier medical staffs. We saw it against the Jaguars, Bengals. He didn't look that banged up. So credit to the Chiefs. What, second Super Bowl win now in 5 years, 4
Yeah,
years,
4 years.
which is incredible. Yep. Andy Reid getting revenge against the team that let him go, that he took to one Super Bowl and couldn't beat. All in all, besides the call, so besides really the last 2 minutes of the game, Mitch, it was a phenomenal game. I enjoyed watching the Super Bowl as a fan of just football because my team can't get there. It was a blast. It was a really, really good game.
This was the only one that I could find. I don't think this is the one you're referring to. Yeah, I didn't think so.
And I'll see if I can find it and send it to you.
Yeah, because look, I made it no secret that I had picked the Eagles to win because I thought they were the team coming in that was on a better roll than Kansas City was. Kansas City had to semi sweat out a game against Jacksonville and then really had to nail down against the Bengals. But that first half kind of felt like what happened with San Francisco just 3 years ago, where San Francisco has that hold for the majority of the game, and then Kansas City is able to slip out and find some breaks. Now, granted, Kansas City had more of an offensive system going than they did 3 years ago. They obviously had that great opening drive for their side right after the Eagles took the ball down and scored. You had what's his name? Bolton making that play on Hurts, or it wasn't even a knockout. It was just the ball fell out of Hurts' hands and it was taken back to the house. It was nearly taken back a second time because there were a number of points last night where, the replay really came out to be, and people were getting frustrated because it's like, what is a catch? What is it not a catch anymore? And I didn't think that was a catch, that one that was nearly taken back. But I also thought you could have called the one for Devontae Smith just before halftime as well, because it was that close and you call it a completion.
Before you go further, I have to ask, were you at all triggered last night on the Miles Sanders on the field called catch, fumble, return for a touchdown? Because that is the same exact stadium Ohio State and Clemson played in 2020, when Ohio State clearly stripped a ball after a catch. 2+ feet were made and a football move was made, and then it was overturned to an incomplete catch. Because I was a little bit triggered last night, Mitch.
I wasn't thinking about that. I had seen during the broadcast that two of the best Super Bowls had been played in that stadium prior to this one, which was the Giants beating the undefeated Patriots, and I think the Malcolm Butler Super Bowl against Seattle. Yes. So that's a good stadium to have three of those games in.
Good games, bad field.
Games, bad field. What was up last night? You're painting the entirety of the grass. I understand it's like for presentation, maybe you want to make it look a little brighter than it is, but if you're gonna do that, then play. I mean, you saw multiple guys have to switch cleats throughout the game.
Right, and this is I'm gonna make sure I give credit. This is from Joe Pompolano. So this is a tweet he sent out last night. And obviously, the Super Bowl we know is a big deal. Not only is it a big deal to football fans, Mitch, the casual fan and people that don't watch football watch the Super Bowl. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, TV show of the year. The NFL spent 2 years preparing the grass for the game at the Super Bowl. The grass was grown at a local sod farm in Phoenix, Arizona. It was installed 2 weeks ago, and the field has been rolled out each morning for daily sunshine, which is all really cool. There's only 2 stadiums in the NFL to do that. It is obviously now State Farm Stadium in Arizona, and I believe Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas is the other stadium that does that, because these are inside or dome stadiums, and they wheel the grass out to get the sunlight. They wheel it back in. The NFL spent $800,000 on that field last night.
Mm-hmm.
How on earth do you have players slipping? And one player said it was like they were on an ice rink. How on earth do you let that happen? And it wasn't, let's not act like, oh, it's because of the halftime show with Rihanna and, they had to wheel all that stuff out and wheel it off.
No, that was happening in the first half.
Exactly. And so that whole argument's out the window. And that's why players, Mitch, they said they switched the cleats at halftime. So that means they would have went into the locker room before at halftime knowing they needed to change the cleats. So that whole argument's out. What on earth? My whole thing with this is, we saw it with Ohio State and Clemson in 2020, the Sugar Bowl. We saw it this past year with Michigan and TCU in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. players slipping all over. There is something with whatever they do. Obviously, I know it's a different field because I just read you the facts. NFL paid 800 grand for this. There is something they do in Arizona, though, Mitch, outside of Cardinals games. I don't watch Cardinals games. Players are slipping on these surfaces in Arizona in State Farm Stadium more often than not. You can go back and look at histories of games played at the stadium and players slipping all over the field and losing their footing. I mean, heck, you almost saw, was it Harrison Butker or Elliott last night, snap their ankle on a kickoff, slipping to try with the plant foot. It was absurd, absolutely absurd. And I think part of that had to do with why the Eagles couldn't get much pressure on Mahomes. You always hear these NFL defensive linemen, they never want to play in snow because it's hard to get their footing, be able to make quick cuts and moves past linemen.
Sure.
I think I'm giving the Chiefs offensive line the most credit, by the way. I think they deserved the MVP award last night in the Super Bowl. But this definitely had a factor for both sides in the game. One team came out on top, but I can't believe that they paid $800,000 for that field. And it was as bad of quality as we saw.
So was this like a real grass, or was this like a slit?
This is
real
real
grass.
grass.
Okay, because the only reference I had was the issue earlier in the season with slit turf, or I think that's the term of it, is a slit film turf, which NFLPA president J.C. Treader called upon the league to, ban that material because it was used in 6 stadiums and players were typically getting hurt on it compared to regular grass. But that's such a weird, it's such a fascinatingly odd addition to this game, which already had a number of factors going into each and every play. I mean, you look at some of the things that happened earlier on in the contest where, I was surprised there wasn't that helmet to helmet hit in the beginning of the game. There was one. And then obviously with all the instant replays that were happening. And then again, going back to that Bradbury play, it's more so just a poorly timed call than anything else, because you don't want to have it, because all the factors that were necessary to have that call be so impactful were right there, because the Eagles were running out of timeouts. The Chiefs were in a spot where they could take the lead just on a field goal, which kind of was frustrating because how did the Eagles let Mahomes earlier in the drive go for that huge quarterback scramble up the middle on one good ankle and 80 painkillers? I just don't know. But look, this was a Super Bowl that I think was in line to maybe become one of the top 10, if not top 5 championship games of all time. I think this now slips to maybe 10 or 12. And it's debatable. I was going off of a list of, it was NFL.com who put up their own list of the top Super Bowls of all time. They had number 1 as the Steelers Cowboys game in Super Bowl 13, which was a great game. I'll give you that, but I don't know if I would put it number 1. Obviously, you have the Giants Patriots game, the Seahawks and Patriots and Falcons. That's my number 1. Giants and Bills. And then the point where I was like, okay, I could see this game maybe being up there was around right after the Eagles win, was Steelers and Rams in 14 or Patriots Panthers in 2003. I don't know. It's such a subjective ranking as to where this game would have gone. But if they had stuck that landing, we had gone to overtime, or if we had seen the Eagles try to make one last great drive after a Chiefs field goal, if they get to 4th down, it kind of made me feel like I missed something right at the end of that game because I was enjoying it for the first 3 and 3 quarters.
That's exactly what it was. You have this almost empty feeling as a casual football fan or just a fan of football in general, because we didn't get the ending that was, you don't want to say expected, but that the game was leading you up to believe was going to come, right? With how many penalties were not thrown in that game, to see a play like that ultimately determine the outcome, it hurts. And obviously every play in the Super Bowl, every play in every single game matters, but I'm with you, because I personally think this was going to potentially, if it went into overtime, or even if you let Jalen Hurts get the ball back and they're down 3 and they drive into field goal range, or the Chiefs score and the Eagles are driving down to score a touchdown, they get within the 20, you're on the edge of your seat, if not standing up. Obviously, Eagles fans, Chiefs fans, people that bet on the game, and just people who like good football games. But we didn't get that. So I feel like there is that little void now that we're missing. But it was still a really good game. I mean, I think the entirety of the game was better than last year's between the Rams and the Bengals. There was just so much suspense. There was the the Eagles and Chiefs going back and forth, and then the Eagles with a 10-point lead at the half, and then the Chiefs outscoring the Eagles 24-11. And I think that's my biggest thing is how do you let the Chiefs outscore you 24-11 in the second half when you knew Mahomes was gimpy, even though he didn't look like it in the second half?
Yeah, I don't know. And there was that whole thing at the end of the game where it was like right at the in the post game when they were talking about. I think it was when Mahomes and Kelsey were being talked at in the post game and how it wasn't something exactly they said, but it had the cadence of the Chiefs were looked at as underdogs all year. And I kept thinking to myself, the Chiefs being underdogs doesn't sound like the most realistic take, but the Eagles were the newer team. They were the hotter team throughout most of the year. So everyone just kind of, I think more people kind of maybe latched onto them because Philadelphia was a more attractive team for the first time in a while. And you're comparing it to the Chiefs who are there year in and year out. The Chiefs are in that Patriots 2000s phase now, and I'm gonna have to deal with it every single year pretty much, to where I didn't have that feeling for Brady, and now I have my Brady for the generations before me, because it's just going to be the Chiefs year in, year out. And we'll get to later on in the show our two early picks for next year, which will probably be not much different from what we just saw last night. Any final thoughts before we head to break on what happened? We'll get into some of it in segment two, but any game centric thoughts, Mitch?
No, not really. I thought it was a very, very entertaining game. The only thing I'll say is, and I heard this take this morning, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. The Chiefs were in the white uniforms, obviously.
Hmm?
Somebody said that you need to be smarter as an Eagles defender and wear white gloves because Bradbury wearing all black gloves probably made it a little more obvious for the penalty to be thrown. I don't know how I feel about that. I thought it was a very hot take, and I thought, well, there's a point to that. And at the same time, I thought that's not ultimately what it
No,
was.
no.
If somebody
Just
gets
don't,
held, it's pretty obvious.
as much as you want to win and stop that receiver, don't put your hands on him to the point where that call can be made. And I give
Exactly.
Bradbury a lot of credit. He of all people could have easily not been as humble as he was in the locker room, and I give him a lot of credit for that response that he had.